You can see how crooked that stock shock is. It just looks funny, sticking out towards the top. That's always bugged me. The Gen 1 and Gen 4 shock seems to go straight up and down. Look how the Gen 4 shock mount comes in like this. It's further to the right side of the bike. The Gen 5 shock mounts seem to be even with this outside bar, so a lot further to the left side of the bike. That was intentionally done, I think, to fit that big wide tire with that little bit of clearance. I think the solution is an NCY shock, because the NCY shock is offset down here. Because the base of the NCY shock is offset, it makes the shock set much straighter, get a lot more tire clearance, and just looks better overall. And I got this one here. This is the typical one you see for the 150s, that I think they say 10.4 inches eye to eye. And for the zoomer, I see a lot of people just throw these shocks on their bike. They say, oh, it sits too low, it sags too much. But don't just throw suspension on your bike. Suspension is like a carburetor. It needs to be tuned. So this shock is more adjustable than a lot of people know. You can adjust it for rider sag and for height. Don't try to get your ride height by tightening or loosening the spring. Tightening and loosening the spring is how you get your desired feel, how you want the bike to handle. You're going to get your ride height right here. You loosen this collar, this comes all the way off. There's no real instructions. NCY never shows you this, but you see the bottom of the shock looks like that. It's plenty fine to use, like a car shock. And I would imagine that big thick line is the maximum height on it. So they call this a 265 millimeter shock, but it's actually probably 265 to 295. Almost 11.5 inches of ride height there. The bike comes stock at about 10 and a quarter to 10 and a half, somewhere in there. So that's that 10.4. Of course, this shock doesn't sag down at all. I kind of like the stock height, so I'll probably make my shock longer, and then when I sit on it, it'll come out to this measurement right here. But to determine how much sag we want to give the bike, we really need to know how much travel the shock has. Looks like I could probably compress that all the way into the bump stop. So the whole shaft appears to be the travel. I really didn't need to pull it apart. With full bump stop compression, the travel would go to right there. So we'll call that full travel. Here's to have a full travel of, we'll call it 43 millimeters. 30%, that'd be a good max. 12.8, so even 13. Anywhere between 12 and 13 is the sag I'm shooting for in the rear. And then once we get that sag dialed in, we'll adjust ride height. 12.7 millimeters, that's where I want it to sag to. With my full weight on it, I'll make a mark there. And it had to be real accurate. And I'll adjust the spring tension to give me that. And that, I want this to come down to that line with my full weight sitting on the bike. Because remember, that sag is going to let your bike fall into holes also. This part here is when you hit a bump, the bike comes up and your body doesn't, but this part here is when you hit a hole, the bike goes down and your body doesn't. You can use your bump stop to measure sag, push it all the way up to the shock cylinder, and then when it squishes down, the bump stop will stay where you last squished it down to, just like the zip tie would. Everything is on here loose right now. I'm just worrying about the sag, so I'm going to sit on it, get my feet up on it, get all my weight on it, and balance it for just a bit. It sagged down all the way to up here, so I need a lot of spring pressure, because this part of the shock went all the way up here. and I want it to stop right there. So I need a lot more spring pressure. To do that, I'll just tighten this. Alright, I've tightened the spring just by turning it by hand like this, and it's getting pretty tight. I may end up needing little wrenches later, but now I'll put the bump stop back down. We'll take another measurement. Get that on the bottom there. Weight on it right there. Let's see what we got. Still sagging too much. There's your bump stop up there, and that's where I want it to go to, is right here. So now I've run out of threads, and that's as far as I can get that spring tight for what you call preload. You can see I wanted to go to here, to this line, and I went all the way to this line. So I'm probably running about 45% sag right there, which is a lot, but I need a heavier spring at this point, just like the forks. Gotta have a heavier spring to fix this issue. Tighten these down. Keep that from moving. And now I'll set the rear end height. The static sag of, looks like 11 inches. So that's about 3/4 more inches than I had before. And a longer shock, you gotta be careful. When you add length, you'll hit right here with your engine. So you can't add too much length. My weight on the bike, I'm at about 10 1/4, which is where I wanted to be. Alright, so that's where I'm gonna keep it. And it's just like with the front end, I did not want a lowered bike. I wanted to keep the stock height, or even more. And so just with the front end, I didn't go lowered. I'm not going to go lower to the back end, so I'm going to keep this here. So now when I'm riding it, it'll be at the same height I was at originally, the 10.4 or 10 1/4. And but when I'm off the bike, it does sit a little bit higher. So that should work. I'm going to tighten everything down. That not only looks a lot better, but I'm sure it'll ride a lot better. And stay tuned for my suspension test, because I'm going to test it. So we're going to do a Ghetto Labs scientific test and find out if the NCY suspension is that much better.